If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story.
It was another sweltering day in Franklin County, Florida, the air thick with humidity. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement of the neighborhood. Deputy Ralph Gordon, a man used to the mundane, had just finished his usual patrol when a vehicle caught his attention. It wasn't anything special, just a beat-up blue sedan, the kind that barely managed to keep running. But what intrigued Gordon was the slight hesitation the car showed when it noticed him. The vehicle had been traveling at a slow pace, almost as if the driver was expecting to be pulled over. Gordon, with his years of experience, knew something was off. His instincts told him to approach with caution. What Gordon didn't know, however, was that the man behind the wheel wasn't a typical local troublemaker, but someone much more dangerous, someone who was about to teach him a very painful lesson. Gordon flicked on his sirens, pulling the car over to the side of the road. His thoughts were already calculating what he would say, how he would approach. As the sedan rolled to a stop, Gordon's gaze narrowed. He had a good idea of what he was dealing with. Just another run-of-the-mill traffic stop. But then, something about the car, the tinted windows, the way the driver moved, something felt wrong. The door opened slowly, and out stepped a man dressed in dark tactical gear, a black cap concealing his face. As he stood up straight, Gordon's hand instinctively rested on his holster. Something about the man's posture screamed authority, but in Gordon's mind, it was more the kind of arrogance that could get a person hurt. "Good afternoon, sir," the man said, his voice steady and calm. "I'm Special Agent James Burke with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. I'm conducting an operation here. Can I see your ID, deputy?" Gordon blinked, taken aback. "What's this about?" he stammered. "What kind of operation are you running here?" Burke, still calm, flashed a badge at Gordon. It wasn't a typical badge, and Gordon didn't recognize it, but that didn't matter. Burke's authority was clear, at least in his own mind. Gordon's unease grew. He didn't trust this. The badge could have been forged. The man could be an imposter. "What's going on here, deputy?" Burke pressed again, his calm tone never wavering. "I'm a federal agent, and I have every right to be here. You know the laws. You don't need to question me." Gordon could feel his pulse racing. His gut told him something was wrong, but his pride and sense of duty pushed him forward. "You think you can just waltz in here and talk to me like that? I don't care if you're FBI or not. Show me your credentials," Gordon barked, the tension palpable in his voice. Burke raised an eyebrow. The man wasn't just questioning his authority, he was defying it. "I just showed you my credentials, deputy. If you want to keep making this a problem, we can do that. But I'll remind you, this is federal business. If you're too thick-headed to understand that, we can escalate it." For the first time, Gordon hesitated. The exchange, already uncomfortable, was escalating. He didn't want to back down, but Burke wasn't budging. The standoff continued as both men locked eyes, and the air between them thickened with a mixture of professional pride and something much darker. The deputy couldn't believe it. Who was this guy, really? And why the hell did he have so much nerve trying to undermine him? Suddenly, Burke shifted. His hands moved, not threateningly, but in a way that showed Gordon he was prepared for any move he might make. "You think you can get away with treating me like this? I've seen people like you before. You think you know the law, but you're too blinded by your own power." That hit hard. Gordon's face flushed red. The insult burned, but he refused to back down. "What the hell are you talking about?" he spat, anger bubbling to the surface. "I'm trying to do my job here, and you're making it a damn spectacle. You can't just come into my county, throw your weight around, and expect me to bow down. I don't care who you think you are." Burke's eyes flashed with cold fury. He had a job to do, but he wasn't going to be treated like a second-rate officer. He straightened his posture, and without saying another word, moved with lightning speed. Before Gordon even realized it, Burke had him pinned against the side of the vehicle. His handcuffs clicked shut. "You're under arrest," Burke said calmly, his voice unwavering, "for obstruction of justice and failure to comply with a federal agent. Now, do yourself a favor and stop resisting." Gordon struggled for a moment, but the pressure Burke exerted was overwhelming. "You can't do this to me," Gordon gasped, panic beginning to rise in his chest. I'm a deputy sheriff. You can't. I've already done it, Burke interrupted, his tone final. And you're about to regret underestimating me. The sun continued its descent, casting long shadows over the street as Burke radioed in for backup. What had started as a routine traffic stop had spiraled into a dangerous game of pride and power. Burke knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just putting a rookie cop in his place. He was sending a message that nobody, no matter how powerful or arrogant, was above the law. As the sheriff's deputies arrived, they stood silently, watching in disbelief. They had been trained to respect law enforcement. But this was beyond anything they had witnessed. Burke had humiliated one of their own right in front of them, and it wasn't just about the arrest. It was about everything that had built up to this moment. Gordon, now handcuffed and humiliated, was shoved into the back of a squad car. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His pride had been shattered in front of his colleagues, and there was nothing he could do to reverse what had happened. As the car pulled away, Burke stood tall, his expression unreadable. This wasn't about the small-town deputy. This wasn't about winning. This was about making sure the world understood that no one, no matter their badge, no matter their rank, was above the law. And if anyone had any doubts about the power of federal agents, well, they had just witnessed it firsthand. The hum of the patrol car's engine faded into the background as Deputy Gordon sat in the back seat, his hands still cuffed, his mind racing with confusion and anger. What had just happened? How had things gone so far? He replayed the events over and over in his head, trying to make sense of what he had just experienced. He had pulled over what he thought was just another suspicious car on his shift, but it had escalated into a confrontation with an FBI agent. No, a special agent, and now here he was, handcuffed in the back of his own squad car. His breath was heavy, and the taste of humiliation lingered on his tongue. He couldn't believe how quickly the situation had spun out of control. He had been trained to handle all kinds of people, but a federal agent wasn't something he had ever anticipated running into on his usual patrol route. As the car made its way to the local station, Gordon's mind was filled with more questions than answers. Why had Burke come here? What was the FBI really after in his town? And why had Burke, in the blink of an eye, arrested him like that? Gordon had done nothing wrong. He had been simply doing his job. But Burke had somehow turned the tables on him in a way that felt deliberate, personal. The car finally came to a halt outside the station. The doors opened, and 2 officers approached. Gordon was escorted out of the vehicle and into the holding area. As he walked through the cold, sterile halls of the precinct, he couldn't help but feel the eyes of his colleagues on him. They all knew what had happened. They had seen the confrontation, the arrest. They had witnessed the humiliation of one of their own. Inside the holding room, Gordon was left to stew in his thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was going on. Something beyond a simple traffic stop. Why had Burke been so aggressive? Why had he pulled out the federal credentials so quickly, as though he had been expecting this confrontation all along? Gordon sat down heavily, his frustration mounting. The officers who had accompanied Burke were outside, whispering amongst themselves, likely discussing what had just occurred. They would no doubt report the incident to their superiors. The fear of what might come next began to gnaw at Gordon. Minutes stretched into hours, and still there was no word from anyone. Gordon's pride was bruised. His reputation, the years he had spent building trust in his community, had been tarnished in an instant. His colleagues would never look at him the same way again. Finally, the door to the holding room opened. Officer Simmons, a veteran cop from the next precinct over, stepped inside. He was the one who had been called to the scene to assist in the situation earlier, and from the look on his face, Gordon could tell that things had only gotten worse since. "Gordon," Simmons said, his voice low and serious. "You need to understand something. Burke isn't just some agent who wandered into town. The guy you tangled with, he's not here by accident." Gordon stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" Simmons let out a long sigh, rubbing his temple. "I've been doing some digging. The FBI's been watching this area for a while. They've been monitoring a network of corruption, and you just happened to get in their way. They've been looking into some unsavory activities going on behind the scenes here, and you, my friend, We're just too close to it. The weight of Simmons' words hit Gordon like a freight train. Corruption? What are you talking about? He asked, his voice shaking now. Look, Simmons said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. There are people in this county, people you might know, who are involved in a lot of things that go beyond just regular police work. Things that go deeper. Burke was sent here to dig, and you were just a small part of it. You might not even realize what's going on under your nose. Gordon swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it all. But I was just doing my job, he muttered, almost to himself. I know you were, Simmons replied, his face hardening. But that's the problem. You didn't know what you were dealing with. Burke knew. He's been watching for months, and now he's put you on the radar. It's not just the FBI that's involved here. We're talking about people who pull strings from the shadows. Simmons paused, looking at Gordon with a mix of pity and concern. You're in this deeper than you think, but I'll help you out. You've got to listen to me now. This is serious. Burke's not the only one you have to worry about. The gravity of Simmons' words hit Gordon like a ton of bricks. He had no idea what he had stumbled into. And now, more than ever, he had to find out the truth. He wasn't sure if he could trust the system anymore. But he couldn't let it end like this. He needed to clear his name, and he needed to find out who was behind it all. The following days after the arrest were a blur for Deputy Gordon. The shame of his public humiliation still stung, and the weight of Simmons' words continued to haunt him. There was a level of distrust in the air now, not just from his colleagues, but also from the community. The incident had caused a ripple, and Gordon was starting to see the cracks in the system that he had once believed were unbreakable. He spent the next few days alone, brooding over the details of the situation. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of Special Agent Burke, calm, collected, and far more composed than Gordon had ever expected from a federal agent. Burke had known something that Gordon had not. That much was obvious. The agent had acted with the precision of someone who had been watching, waiting. As much as Gordon wanted to shake it off, he couldn't ignore the feeling that the confrontation had been orchestrated. There was a reason Burke had come after him, a reason that went beyond the simple question of authority. On the fourth day after the incident, Gordon decided to make contact with Simmons again. He needed answers. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was just a misunderstanding. If what Simmons said was true, and if the corruption ran as deep as he claimed, then he needed to know who was behind it and what their endgame was. That afternoon, Gordon met Simmons in a nondescript diner on the outskirts of town. The place was quiet, the kind of place where no one asked questions, a perfect spot for private conversations. Simmons was already seated at a corner booth, his eyes scanning the door as Gordon approached. "Gordon, take a seat," Simmons said with a curt nod, his eyes darting over the menu despite not really paying attention to it. Gordon slid into the booth, his mind racing. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About this corruption thing. I need to know more. I can't just sit here anymore pretending that this is business as usual." Simmons looked at him for a long moment before leaning in slightly. "You want to know what you're up against?" he asked quietly. "You've got no idea, Gordon. This is bigger than you or me. It's bigger than the department." Gordon leaned forward, feeling the weight of Simmons' words sink in. "What are we talking about here? What did Burke find?" Simmons' eyes flickered with hesitation before he finally spoke. "The corruption goes straight to the top. It's not just a few dirty cops or even crooked business dealings. This is an operation. They've been pulling the strings from the shadows for years, and Burke, he's been sent to clean up the mess. But it's not just the FBI, they've got connections everywhere. The people running this show, they're untouchable." The gravity of the situation hit Gordon hard. For years, he had been proud of his work. He had done everything by the book. But now he realized that he had been operating within a system that had been compromised from the inside. So who's behind this? Gordon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Simmons hesitated before answering, his gaze darting around the diner once again. "I don't have all the details yet, but I've been digging, and what I've found doesn't look good. There are connections to high-ranking officials, both in law enforcement and beyond. They've been using their power to protect a network of illicit activities: drug trafficking, money laundering, and worse. And these aren't just some small-time criminals we're dealing with. They've got access to resources that make them nearly impossible to touch. Gordon's mind reeled. Drug trafficking, money laundering, it was all too much to absorb. He had joined the force to serve and protect, to keep his community safe. But now it seemed like the very people who were supposed to uphold the law were the ones breaking it. So what now? Gordon asked. What do we do? Simmons paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing as if weighing his next words carefully. We dig. We find the connections, the people involved. We put the pieces together, but we need to be careful. The people we're dealing with aren't just criminals. They've got influence. You can't just go barging in and expect everything to fall into place. If we want to take them down, we have to be smart about it. If we move too fast, too openly, we'll expose ourselves. And you'll never get a second chance. Gordon nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of Simmons's advice. He had to move cautiously. The road ahead was treacherous, but it was the only one that led to the truth. He knew that now. And what about Burke? Gordon asked, the memory of their last interaction still fresh in his mind. What happens if he's part of all this? Simmons looked pained, as if he too was unsure about the man's true intentions. That's what we need to figure out. Burke could be the key to everything, but we can't trust anyone fully right now. It's going to take time, Gordon. Patience. You need to be ready for whatever comes next. The conversation shifted from there, with Simmons offering Gordon a few contacts in the department who might be able to help him navigate the treacherous waters ahead. But as Gordon left the diner that day, his mind was still spinning. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't back out now. He had to see this through. Deputy Gordon sat in his car, staring at the files spread out on the passenger seat. The weight of the information he had gathered was heavy, but it wasn't enough. He needed more. He couldn't go to Simmons with half-finished leads or speculation. He needed hard evidence, something that would connect the dots, something concrete to bring the whole operation to its knees. Gordon's instincts were starting to kick in, and he felt that familiar surge of adrenaline that came when a case was about to break wide open. He wasn't sure where the trail would lead, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. The corruption, the dirty cops, the illicit networks, they were all part of something much larger than anyone had anticipated. And Gordon knew that someone had to take a stand. He couldn't let this go on. Not after what he had learned. The idea that there were people in power pulling the strings behind the scenes, using their influence to protect their criminal activities, made his blood boil. He had spent years working to uphold the law, to protect the community. And now, he was faced with the harsh reality that those he had once trusted were the very ones perpetuating the injustice. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel, trying to focus. The plan was simple: keep digging, find the key players, and expose the operation for what it was. But Gordon knew it wouldn't be that easy. Whoever was behind this had resources, power, and influence far beyond his reach. He was just one man, one deputy. The odds were stacked against him. But Gordon was no stranger to adversity. He had faced difficult situations before, and he had always come out on top. This time, however, the stakes were much higher. He wasn't just fighting to solve a case, he was fighting to bring justice to an entire community that had been lied to and manipulated for years. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Simmons. "We need to talk. I found something." Gordon didn't waste a second. He started the engine and headed toward Simmons's office. This was it. The breakthrough he had been waiting for. The office was dimly lit, with papers strewn across the desk and files stacked high. Simmons was hunched over a stack of documents, his face tense with concentration. When Gordon walked in, Simmons barely looked up. "Sit down," Simmons said, his voice tight. "I've got something that's going to change everything." Gordon took a seat across from him, his heart pounding in anticipation. "What did you find?" Simmons slid a file across the table, and Gordon opened it without hesitation. Inside was a list of names, high-ranking officials, both within law enforcement and in the private sector. Each name was linked to one or more criminal activities. money laundering, drug trafficking, extortion, and more. The connections were undeniable. "This is the network," Simmons said, his voice low. "This is the web that we're dealing with. And it's not just a few bad apples. It's a well-organized operation that spans across state lines." Gordon's eyes scanned the names, his stomach churning as he recognized several familiar faces. There were deputies, district attorneys, business owners, even politicians. People he had worked with, trusted. His mind was reeling. "I knew it was big," Gordon said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I had no idea it went this deep." Simmons nodded. "It's worse than we thought, and it's going to get even uglier. I've been tracking their movements and I found something disturbing. One of the names on that list? He's connected to a group that's been smuggling weapons. High-grade weapons, and it's all linked to a bigger plan. This isn't just about money anymore. This is about power, control." Gordon felt the weight of Simmons' words sink in. He knew what this meant. If the operation was connected to smuggling weapons, then it wasn't just a criminal enterprise. It was a threat to national security. "What do we do now?" Gordon asked, his voice steady, despite the storm brewing in his chest. Simmons looked up, his expression grim. "We have to move fast. If we don't act now, we'll lose the chance to take them down for good. But we can't do it alone. We need help. We need the FBI, the CIA, and we need to be ready for a fight." Gordon nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The people behind this were dangerous, and if they were willing to use weapons to protect their empire, there was no telling what they would do to keep their operation running smoothly. Simmons stood up and began pacing. "The next step is clear," he said, his voice growing more urgent. "We've got to find out who's behind the weapons deals. And we've got to hit them hard. No more half measures. We need to expose them for who they really are, criminals who have been hiding behind the badge." Gordon stood up as well, his fists clenched. "Let's do it." The plan was set into motion quickly. Gordon and Simmons worked tirelessly, gathering intelligence, contacting informants, and coordinating with federal agencies. They knew the risks. They were going up against a well-funded, well-protected network of criminals. But they had no choice. The longer they waited, the more lives would be destroyed. As the days passed, Gordon felt a growing sense of unease. They were getting closer to the truth, but the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake, and if he did, the consequences would be dire. Late one night, as Gordon was reviewing some surveillance footage from a local warehouse, his phone rang. It was Simmons. "I've got something," Simmons said, his voice strained. "We found the weapons. They're being stored in a facility just outside of town. We need to move fast." Gordon didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." The two men met up at the warehouse later that evening, along with a team of federal agents. As they approached the building, Gordon's heart raced. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. If they could take down the weapons operation, they would cripple the entire network. But if they failed, the consequences didn't bear thinking about. The team moved in, their movements swift and precise. They breached the doors, and the first wave of agents flooded the warehouse. The sight that met them was more than they had prepared for. Stacks of high-grade weaponry, rifles, handguns, and explosives lined the shelves. This wasn't just a simple weapons deal. This was an armament operation on a massive scale. Gordon's eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of the people behind the operation. And then, in the corner of the warehouse, he saw them. Two men, heavily armed, standing guard. They didn't look surprised to see the agents. They looked ready. Shots rang out. The gunfire echoed through the darkened warehouse, the sound of metal striking metal as bullets ricocheted off the steel beams above. The agents, now fully engaged in a firefight, were caught in a moment of chaos. Gordon instinctively ducked behind a stack of crates, feeling the sting of tension coursing through his body. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the only light came from the flickering glow of flashlights and the occasional muzzle flash from the weapons being fired. "Take cover!" Simmons yelled, his voice strained with urgency as he pulled Gordon to the ground behind a steel pillar. "We need to make sure we don't get cornered. There are more of them inside." Gordon nodded, his pulse racing. The fight was no longer just about taking down a criminal network. It had escalated to survival. The stakes had reached a boiling point. The sound of boots crunching on gravel outside warned them that more agents were arriving. The backup was there. But it didn't matter. The danger had already arrived in full force. Gordon peered out cautiously from behind his cover, watching the two guards that had been standing near the weapons stash. They were crouched low now, their assault rifles aimed and searching for targets. The air was thick with the tension of what was about to happen next. "I'm going in," Gordon whispered to Simmons. "We can't let them get away. We need to neutralize the threat before it gets worse." Simmons hesitated but saw the determination in Gordon's eyes. "Wait for backup," he pleaded, but Gordon had already made up his mind. He knew that every second counted, and if they didn't act now, the entire operation could fall apart. Gordon stood and sprinted toward the far end of the warehouse, zigzagging between the rows of crates for cover. The flash of gunfire lit up the darkness as the guards started firing at the advancing agents. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse. Gordon's heart pounded as he pushed forward, inching closer to the two gunmen. His mind was calculating every move, knowing that one wrong decision could cost him everything. As he rounded a corner, he found himself face to face with one of the guards. Time seemed to slow as Gordon reacted instinctively. He ducked under the rifle barrel, grabbing the guard's arm and spinning him toward the crates, using his momentum against him. In one fluid motion, Gordon slammed the guard's head against the steel surface, knocking him unconscious. The other guard, hearing the commotion, swung his rifle in Gordon's direction. But Gordon was already behind cover, ducking low as the bullets flew. He had only one chance. "Now," Gordon shouted, his voice steady as he fired a controlled burst at the second guard, hitting him in the shoulder. The man staggered, dropping his weapon as he fell to the ground. Simmons and the backup agents burst into the warehouse, guns drawn. They quickly secured the area, checking for more threats. The two guards were neutralized, but Gordon knew this was just the beginning. "We need to move fast," Simmons said, his voice tight with the stress of the operation. "They're not going to give up easily." Gordon nodded, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of what they had uncovered. The weapons were just the tip of the iceberg. If the people behind this operation were willing to kill to protect their secrets, there was no telling what they would do next. As the team moved deeper into the warehouse, they found a hidden compartment in the back, tucked away beneath a false floor panel. Gordon pulled it open, revealing stacks of cash, stacks of documents, and several hard drives, each labeled with various locations and names. "This is it," Gordon said, his voice grim. "This is the evidence we need to take down the whole operation. We've got the money, the names, and the connections." Simmons bent down and grabbed one of the hard drives, his hands shaking slightly as he examined it. "This is going to make a huge difference. This could be the proof we need to tie everything together." But Gordon's focus wasn't on the documents or the money. He knew the truth was in the names. The people behind this operation were much more powerful than anyone had realized. As he stood up and looked around the warehouse, he knew that they had just scratched the surface. The deeper they went, the more dangerous the mission became. Suddenly, the crackle of a radio broke the tension. "Gordon," Simmons said, his voice low, "there's something you need to see. Now." The scene had shifted. Gordon and Simmons were no longer in the warehouse. They were now at the local police station, surrounded by the team of agents who had come to assist with the raid. Gordon stood with his arms crossed, his mind racing with thoughts of the operation's aftermath. "What's going on, Simmons?" Gordon asked, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. Simmons motioned for Gordon into a small office. Inside, a large map of the city covered the wall, pinned with dozens of red dots. "This is bigger than we thought," Simmons said, his tone grim. "We've got a lead on a major political figure who's been tied to the weapons network. A senator, in fact. We've already got confirmation that he's been using his position to funnel money into the operation." Gordon's stomach churned as he took in the information. A senator? The corruption ran deep, and it seemed like there was no escape from the endless web of deceit. "This is going to cause a huge uproar," Gordon muttered, his voice laced with frustration. "If this gets out, it could destroy everything. People will lose their trust in the system." Simmons nodded. That's why we need to be careful. If we expose this too early, we could jeopardize the entire investigation. But if we wait too long, more people will get hurt. Gordon rubbed his face, feeling the exhaustion that had been building since the raid began. We can't wait. We've already seen what these people are capable of. We have to act now. Simmons hesitated. You know what this means, right? We're going to have to confront some very powerful people, and they won't go down without a fight. Gordon's eyes hardened. I didn't sign up for this just to back down. We have a job to do, and if we want to stop them, we have to be willing to push harder than ever. Later that night, Gordon and Simmons met again, this time with a small team of FBI agents. The decision had been made. They would go after the senator, exposing the entire network. But the risks were high, and they knew that every move had to be precise. They set their plan into motion, gathering surveillance on the senator's movements and using the evidence from the warehouse to piece together the final part of the puzzle. The agents had already infiltrated several of the senator's offices, and they had managed to plant listening devices that would give them access to the senator's communications. We're getting close, Simmons said, his voice taut with anticipation. But we can't afford to slip up now. One mistake and this whole thing could go south. Gordon felt the weight of the operation press down on him once again. The pieces were all falling into place. And yet, the closer they got to exposing the truth, the more dangerous it became. There were people out there who would stop at nothing to keep their empire intact. And now, as the sun began to rise over the city, Gordon knew that the final confrontation was coming. They were about to face the people who had corrupted the system from within, and it was up to them to stop it before it was too late. The air was thick with tension as Gordon and Simmons reviewed the final pieces of their strategy. The operation was reaching its climax, but the risks were monumental. They had exposed a powerful criminal network tied to high-ranking politicians, law enforcement, and business moguls, all of whom had been using their influence to orchestrate violent crimes, trafficking, and corruption at an unprecedented scale. As the agents gathered in the war room, Gordon stood at the head of the table, staring at the map before him, which was now covered in red circles and lines marking key players and locations involved in the operation. The lines weren't just a web of criminal activity. They were the blueprint for the danger that awaited them. All right, everyone, Gordon said, his voice sharp. This is the moment we've been working for. We've got everything we need to take down the whole network. But we have to move fast. We can't afford to hesitate. The room was filled with agents, all of whom had spent weeks, if not months, gathering intelligence, infiltrating criminal organizations, and sifting through countless files of evidence. But there was one key player left to catch: Senator Gerald Matthews, the powerful political figure who had been orchestrating the entire operation from behind the scenes. Matthews is our primary target, Simmons added, his voice steady. But we need to be prepared for the worst. This man has his fingers in everything, from illegal arms dealing to human trafficking, money laundering, and drug running. He's one of the most dangerous people we've ever gone after. Gordon turned to Simmons. Do we have confirmation of the senator's involvement in the trafficking ring? Simmons nodded grimly. We've got it all. The senator used his connections to funnel money through his business interests, then directed that cash into the black market. From there, it fed into every part of the network: the arms sales, the human trafficking. It's all connected. Gordon's jaw tightened as he processed the information. It was one thing to take down a criminal syndicate, but another entirely to expose a politician who had long been shielded by his power and influence. If they were wrong about this, they could be ruining countless lives, including their own. We go in tomorrow, Gordon said, breaking the silence. We don't wait any longer. We've got everything we need to bring him down. The next morning, the team was ready. They had surveilled Matthews's every move for the last 48 hours, watching as he moved between meetings with key players in the criminal network, having heated discussions about weapons shipments, and making calls to unknown numbers. They had all the evidence they needed to act, but Gordon couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The senator was too powerful, too connected. It was hard to believe that this wasn't a setup. You ready for this? Simmons asked Gordon, his voice low as they prepared to leave the safe house. Gordon met his gaze, his expression cold. I have to be. The team moved quickly, entering unmarked vehicles and heading toward Matthews's office, where he was scheduled to attend a meeting with his top donors. They had planned to arrest him in the building, securing all the information they could before any word got out. The operation had to be swift. If Matthews was alerted in any way, they could kiss the whole investigation goodbye. As the convoy of cars rolled through the city streets, Gordon's thoughts raced. The closer they got to Matthews, the more the weight of the situation pressed down on him. They had the evidence. But Matthews was a political juggernaut. His power and influence reached deep into the heart of the establishment. If he had any inkling that the FBI was closing in on him, he would do whatever it took to escape. As they arrived at the office complex, the agents quickly dispersed, surrounding the building from all angles. Gordon led a team to the front entrance, while Simmons and another group went through the back. They would catch him in the middle of his meeting, cutting off any escape routes. Gordon's hand tightened around his gun as he approached the entrance. He knew this wasn't just an arrest, it was a war. And he wasn't sure if Matthews would go down without a fight. Inside, Matthews was in the middle of a meeting, sitting at a large conference table surrounded by his closest advisors and several shady businessmen. The conversations were heavy, with discussions about shipping routes, money laundering schemes, and weapons sales, all topics that made Gordon's skin crawl. They had no idea they were being watched. Matthews' phone rang just as Gordon and his team entered the room. He glanced at the caller ID, his eyes narrowing as he answered. "What is it?" Matthews' voice was sharp. The voice on the other end was quiet, a whisper of urgency. "They're coming for you. The FBI. Get out now." Matthews' face went pale. He stood up suddenly, slamming his phone down onto the table. "We need to move. Now." But it was already too late. Gordon kicked the door open, and the FBI agents stormed into the room, guns drawn. Matthews froze, his hands instinctively going up in the air. The room fell silent as the agents took control, quickly handcuffing Matthews and his associates. "Senator Gerald Matthews," Gordon said, his voice cold, "you're under arrest for multiple counts of conspiracy, human trafficking, money laundering, and arms dealing. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." Matthews glared at Gordon, his face twisted in a mix of anger and disbelief. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you're up against." Gordon smirked, feeling a rush of satisfaction. "You're done, Matthews. It's over." The operation wasn't over yet, though. As the agents moved to secure the senator and his associates, they uncovered more evidence, more names. Matthews was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and the deeper they dug, the more they realized that the corruption they had uncovered was far-reaching. Matthews wasn't acting alone. The team quickly began to gather all the files and documents in the office, downloading the contents of Matthews's encrypted laptop, and filing away every piece of information they could find. It was only a matter of time before they uncovered the final players in the operation, the ones pulling the strings from the shadows. But Gordon knew they were racing against the clock. The more they exposed, the more dangerous things would get. If Matthews had connections at the highest levels of government, they had no idea who else might be involved. Their only hope was to keep pushing forward, relentlessly. As Matthews was hauled away in a police car, Gordon looked back at the building. The day had been a victory, but it was only the beginning. With Matthews's arrest, the agents had secured a wealth of information that could dismantle the entire operation, but they still had a long way to go before they could expose the full scope of the corruption. Gordon wasn't done. Not yet. There were more battles ahead, and he would fight them all to bring the guilty to justice.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.